So in this week's video, I'm going to show you how I made these French cleat hung shop wall cabinets. I considered this a pretty easy build, and the majority of the materials for this were scrap. So this is the pile I'm starting out with. I'm going to be cutting down these pieces a little bit because all of this stuff is genuine scrap. It's leftover pieces from a project. Some of this stuff is over 2 years old. I knew I wanted to build out this wall over here, which is in progress. So I had been saving this stuff instead of using it for other little pieces because it was almost the perfect size for cabinets. So the main consideration is they have to be a particular height to fit under the garage door opener, and also I want to eventually make a table for my lasers. And the one laser has a camera, so the height clearance is important. So like I said, this stuff was laying around the shop, so I decided to rip off all of the edges, the long sides as well as cross-cut the short sides, just because it was banged and dinged up, and I also needed to cut it down anyway, so it just worked out I could then work with clean sides. I'm not going to be edge banding this stuff because I hate edge banding. These are shop cabinets. Exposed ply doesn't bother me. If it bothers you, you can cover it, but you can see I have a nicer blade in the table saw, and it leaves a nice clean cut, so I will eventually clear coat these and it will be a nice finish versus that roughed ply that would have to be sanded. So if you're making these right off the bat, it's a very similar process. You just won't be cutting down scrap. You'll be ripping down sheets of plywood and cross-cutting down sheets of plywood. The end result will be the same. My process is just as you can see. I'm only taking off little increments of wood. So I cleaned up one edge, and then I set up a stop on my crosscut sled, and I could cut all of these sides down. So I had enough. The dimensions of these cabinets was based on what I mentioned before about clearances for lasers as well as the garage door opener, but it was also based on the scrap I had. So I had enough for 6 tall sides, and these are the final dimensions I ended up with. I have 6 at 13 by 28, and then I'm calling these shelves, but essentially it's one shelf with a top and a bottom. Those are 12.5 by 23. The 12.5 is because I'm putting 1/2-inch backers on these, so cutting them down to 12.5 means they'll then be flush with the front plus that 1/2-inch backer. Now because this is scrap, a problem I ran into was all of this stuff was varying thicknesses because I'd gotten it at different times. I've ordered stacks of plywood and gotten varying thicknesses in one delivery. So I made a test dado, and there were really only 2 pieces where the thickness was below 3/4, and what you'll see is there will be a little gap. For something like this, that will not bother me. So instead of changing the dado stack 3 times to account for these thicknesses, and then during the glue up making sure I have all the right parts in the right spot, I just decided to cut everything at 3/4, and I was going to deal with the fact that a couple shelves were going to have little hairline cracks. So in order to cut all these dados, I have a 3/4-inch dado stack in my radial arm saw. You can put something like this in a table saw, get the same results, but whenever my lumber is thin enough to get one cut on the radial arm saw, it's a faster process doing it that way. So I'm making a little lip on the top and the bottom of these cabinets. On the bottom side, because I eventually might put lighting under there and that will help hide wires. And then it's just easier to transfer that same lip to the top. You can see with the stop set in place, I can then cut the exact same dado. I prefer dados in this situation because it's a little bit easier to glue up. That little lip, even though it's small, will help hold the panels in place while I'm applying glue and clamping stuff together. If that was a rabbit, which would work, but it has a tendency for that piece to want to kind of kick out on you. Then I'm putting a fixed shelf in these because these aren't very tall. You can see I'm only going to have 2 12-inch cells. I prefer fixed shelves over movable shelves because I find they make for a sturdier cabinet. I made sure to get this exactly in the center. You could see I marked center. I came out 3/8 of an inch for that 3/4-inch dado cut. I could put the stop in there, and it's important that all of these are centered, because then I could put my backside rabbet on whichever side, because they're interchangeable. I usually don't build smaller cabinets like this. I'm usually building cabinetry for stuff like built-ins. The math is a lot more complicated because you have multiple shelves, and then when it comes time to cut the rabbet, which is what I'm doing here, I have a sacrificial fence set up on my table saw. I have a 1/2-inch dado stack in there, and I did a test cut. I can cut these all, it doesn't matter which side they're on. So you can see the cut, I have it set to the same depth as the dado, so everything lines up. My 1/2-inch ply is going to fit in there very nicely. So I was pretty happy with how that turned out. Sometimes with varying thicknesses things, it could be a pain. You can see all of my joints are symmetrical. If they're not, you have to separate your sides into 2 stacks at this point and send 3 through one way and 3 through the other, because your rabbet will have to be on the back side. Now with mine, because it's symmetrical, and I hope this makes sense, it's a little hard to describe when you can't see the whole panel. Since mine are symmetrical, I could cut all of my rabbets on the right hand side, because when I flip them over, they'll still match. If that center dado or your top and bottoms aren't, if you cut them all on the right hand side and then flip them, you'll have 6 of the same side and it won't work. So like I said, that's pretty rare that I have them symmetrical like this. Usually I have to split the stack, and if you watch any of my videos, I always make a point of that, because I have cut these on the wrong side and it ruins an entire stack of sides. Unless it's paint grade material, you could usually patch it and no one will know. So that is what that looks like with this all together. You could see my lip is in the back, and you could see all of my shelves and the top and the bottom come perfectly to that lip, so there will be no gaps in the back. So then I could just measure that for the backer. I happen to have a 1/2-inch piece of plywood, which was almost perfect size. You can see I'm just taking a bit of material off of it, and I was able to get 2 backs out of this one. And then I just pieced together some scrap 1/2-inch ply to make up the back for the 3rd cabinet. It was 2 pieces. I put them vertically so that they covered all of the sides. Something like that, once again, I might not do that for a customer job, but for a shop cabinet, it's more than adequate. And once I had that cut down, you could see I'm cutting them down to height, which is about 28 inches. This is a really good chance, if you have a radial arm saw, to figure out if it's aligned perfectly when you make these long cuts, flipping them back and forth. If your radial arm saw is not aligned, they'll be uneven. And then that's the backer. So one of the reasons I like to do a solid backer is, number one, this is hanging off the wall. There's going to be a lot of weight hanging off the wall, so you want a solid backer, but also because they help straighten and square up the boxes. You can see once that backer lines up with the edges of the 2 sides, this is essentially perfectly square. Without a backer, these things tend to be parallelograms. I've seen people where they put like a 3-inch strip on the top and the bottom. I think that would work fine for something like this, but I had the material. And then I could just glue these cabinets together. Like I said, I'm not used to making cabinets this small. It was kind of a nice change of pace. It's much easier to maneuver these smaller pieces around. The main thing you're doing is making sure your fronts are all on the same plane. If your sides are sticking out or recessed in conjunction with your shelves, then when you put the door on, you're going to have some problems. I put the backer in place and I measure my diagonals. Once my diagonals are the exact same number, I'll go and screw the backer in place. If one side's longer than the other, you just kind of tap on the corner of the long side towards the short side, and within 1/8 of an inch or so, that usually will square it up. Sometimes it takes a little bit of finagling, but the nice thing about these rabbets and dados are, while they take a little bit longer to do, it does help square up the cabinet. So for these are face frameless cabinets. It's easier to do it that way, less material, and I'm doing full overlay hinges. So the full overlay hinge means that this will cover almost the entire outer edge of that frameless cabinet. So that is something to consider when buying hinges. Hinges, there's tons of them. There's multiple brands. I bought really cheap ones off Amazon. I think I got 10 pairs for like $25. I wasn't expecting them to be super great. This video will not cover the realm of hinges because there's quite a bit of information, but these are full overlay frameless cabinet hinges. If I remember, I'll put a link in the description. And to start my stiles and rails, I'm just using poplar. This was one thing I did have to buy. I didn't have enough in the shop. I decided to go with a thicker stile and rail, so these are 2 inches, and I'm just cutting all of my pieces down. So the stiles are going to be 28, and the cabinets at this point are about 23 inches and 3/4. I decided to do bridle joints on all of these because there's going to be a fair amount of weight on the front side of these cabinets. It's a little more substantial than traditional tongue and groove, a little more time consuming, but I think it'll be worth it. As you can see, I just made my center groove on all of my parts on the table saw. And then I have this fancy tenoning jig which will help cut out the center parts of this joint. You do not need a fancy jig like this. I used to just have a wooden box that rode on my fence before someone gave me this. So this joint goes 2 inches up into the piece. It's the same thickness as the stiles. It's essentially a lap joint that's covered on both sides. So once I have that done, I can cut the tongue that will go into that joint. So you can see it's basically a through mortise and tenon. So it's going to be much stronger than a regular 1/2 inch groove that I normally do for these joints. The one downside is, as you could see, because I cut that groove in there, it does leave a little bit of a gap in the corner. Once these are glued up, I just take some scrap and I will cover that so it's not as noticeable. But to cut the tongues, I just set up the radial arm saw once again with a stop. These are going to be 2 inches so that they go 2 inches into that other stile. The beauty of these are there's no math. Your outer perimeter is the exact same size as your opening, minus 1/8 on each sides for clearance for the door. So my outer frame is as tall as the door, which was 28. It was 28 inches, and then like I said, the width was like 3 1/4, but I subtracted 1/4 inch for that 1/8 inch reveal on both sides. For the inserts, I got a little creative with this because I don't have a lot of spaces in my shop for papers, and I work a lot off of photos. People that watch the channel will know that. A lot of my customers send me a photo and I just make the piece, and usually that photo I end up printing out multiple times because I spill stuff on it, I lose it, I rip it, what have not. So I was trying to think of ways to be able to keep these papers out of the way. I also am planning on building out that wall even more. There's going to be a French cleat system, but I'm probably not doing that anytime soon. So I still like pegboard. It's not really versatile for all of my tools, but I do like it for some of them. So I kept one of these inserts pegboard. And then they sell this adhesive whiteboard material, which I wanted to try out. So that is just like contact paper. I just stuck it onto the outside of one of them. I also got a piece of cork board as well as a magnet board for one of the other ones. And then putting these together is pretty simple. Once all your pieces fit, I just glue all of the tongues. You don't really want to put glue on the plywood. The whole point of building doors like this is that outer frame will stay flat and that inner panel will move with seasonal humidity without cracking the frame, because it can move inside that outer frame. Now, some style of cabinets I've seen a lot, people will put just flat sheets of plywood. You can do that, but these doors are a little bit on the larger side, and plywood just isn't extremely flat. I know people think it's flat, but over time it starts to bow. So the whole point of the rails and the stiles are this outer frame will stay pretty flat over time, and that inner panel will kind of eliminate the need for solid wood across the board, which would warp. So I'm attaching these to the wall with French cleats. French cleats are ingenious. There's a reason why they are so popular. Very simple to make. This is just a scrap piece of 3/4 inch ply. I really can't even tell you the width because I just kind of pulled it off of the wall. The main thing I was looking for is I wanted this to be a little bit chunkier than a regular French cleat. You need enough material to be able to screw through the front of it into the wall without going through the top of the 45. But the engineering of a French cleat is just basically a piece of wood with a 45 cut down the middle, and then you put one of those 45s on one surface, one on the other, and they mate together. So obviously you could see that wall is not finished. I thought it was going to be finished for this video, but because it's winter time, it's not super cold in my shop. I have a heater going, but it's cold enough that this joint compound, which isn't even that thick, it just was not drying fast enough. So I obviously am propping all of this stuff up. All of it's going to have to come down, but for the sake of the video and to make sure I didn't have to modify anything, I kind of put everything up real quickly. It was obviously very easy to figure out where the studs were for putting this together. So you saw that those just popped right into place. I had to put a spacer on the back of them. That's where that 3/4 inch plywood is on the bottom. It's a spacer because otherwise they'll sway on top of that 45 if you don't have that bottom spacer. For attaching the hinges, pretty simple. Like I said, these are extremely cheap hinges that I got on Amazon. I'm actually really surprised with the quality of them. They're not going to be as high-end as Blum hinges, but I had no problems putting these up. One of the reasons I chose full overlay hinges is I find that they're one of the easier ones to install and one of the most forgiving, but I had no issues. I cut all these doors at the exact same size. I didn't have to trim a single one of them down. My carcasses were square, my doors were square, and everything worked fine the first time, which is not always the case. Now when you order hinges online, none of them are going to come with instructions. What I like to do is I just prop the door in place and I kind of outline the circle holes, and then the one dimension they do give you is this has to be 37 centimeters back from the face of the cabinet. That's my vertical line. Once I have the circles intersecting with my vertical line, I could pre-drill those and put these in, and it was really easy. With cheap hardware, I find the test of time is going to be the biggest test. So they're working great now. They're also soft close, which is quite nice, but we'll see how long they hold up. So then everything was looking nice. My reveals looked nice, my 1/4 inch in between two of them. But because the wall's not done, this one cabinet was sitting recessed a little bit, so that's why it looks a little off. Once this is all completely done, these 3 cabinets all completely screwed together, so they'll all be on the same plane. And that is basically what this video is. It's a pretty simple project. I'm really happy with it. You can see I now have a spot for some of my more used tools, especially before I make the French cleat wall. I could put some stuff up here, as well as obviously fill these cabinets. So I was pretty happy. This project took me a day to do.